This is the Poolies podcast with Matt Larkin and Stephen Ellis. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Poolies. It's Matt Larkin here with Stephen Ellis, as always, and this is sort of the swan song episode for the fantasy season. It's their NHL regular season. It's the fantasy season for all intents and purposes. Yes, there are playoff pools, but really the meat of fantasy hockey is the season, the regular season. It's almost over. Stephen, how are you doing, and are you alive in your playoffs?
First off, I'm doing awesome. And I am in the finals. Again, not hard to do so far in a 14 league. In my other league, I actually made it to the semifinals despite because every team made the playoffs in that one. But I actually made it in as the semifinals with a team where I didn't even set my lineup in the last week because I'm trying that hard to tank. So good on me. But in the main league, the one I care about the most, the one I talk about the most, I played against the last place team. I really, he went all in. He wanted to make sure that there was no chance I was going to the final, and it did not work out for him. I had a very good final few days. And so I'm in the final week right now. I'm actually winning my matchup, but it is against the guy with McDavid and Matthews. So, of course, I'm kind of banking on Matthews specifically getting some time off, as he has done in the last couple of years at the end of the year. That'd be very great. But, the one thing of it being that 2-week final format is we still only have 4 pickups for the entire time. So I got to use those really well, and I'm going to be saving those as long as I possibly can. So, and I think that's going to be how everyone's doing it, but in my league. So I'm very confident right now. I am projected to lose, but I've been very good at stacking when I needed to.
All right. Well, it's interesting you mentioned the Matthews and sitting, because Mitch Marner being a rest-based scratch on Sunday might have determined my league championship. So I lost in the semis, but there was a guy, my father-in-law, actually, he was winning the entire week, and he had Mitch Marner, and Marner suddenly benched on Sunday, and I think he lost the assist category by 1 assist, and that ended up deciding the matchup. So he did replace Marner with whoever he could find, but obviously it's not a one-for-one proper trade-off. So that's why it gets a little dicey when you get this far into the season. And I'm sort of a proponent for, if possible, ending fantasy leagues a little earlier. We switched for that reason to a 1-week final this year, and it still bit us in the butt in the end. There's still a rest-based scratch that had an impact. So it's too bad, but them's the breaks. And let's see if we can help now, Stephen, whoever's still playing in their leagues, whether it's a final or a roto, playing to the end. And let's do some pickups, my friend.
All right, we're going to start with the shallow league pickup of the week, Brian Rust.
Yeah, Brian Rust. So you'll be hard-pressed to find a streakier player than Brian Rust. And it's very similar to Patrick Laine in the sense that when Rust gets on a heater, it tends to go absolutely bananas, and it often lasts for a long time. So last season, he had a stretch in which he scored 19 goals in 26 games. He did like the majority of his scoring in 1/3 of the season, pretty much. And right now, he's starting to heat up. He's got 3 goals in his last 2 games. He's got 4 goals and 7 points in his last 7 games. And it hasn't been a great year overall for Rust. I think he's been a mild bust in fantasy, but just based on his history, his heaters tend to be extended ones. So maybe you can catch that wave and he'll stay hot for another few games. And another few games is all you need at this point in your fantasy season.
All right. The medium league pickup of the week, Mackenzie Weegar.
Mackenzie Weegar, back from the dead, just like the Calgary Flames. I think Weegar in banger formats has been quite a valuable defenseman the last couple of years. So he was one of the bigger busts of the season, just with the way the Flames year has gone. And you're just getting a lot less output in all categories from Weegar. But it just seems like as the Flames are competitive right now, he's re-engaged. In March, he had 11 points in 15 games. And in that 15-game stretch in March, he had 36 shots, 41 hits, 24 blocks. So basically, he turned into the Weegar we loved last year, who's basically Jacob Trouba this year, who's contributing to pretty much every single category. And his surface stats mean that he's not necessarily that visible as a super attractive pickup because his overall numbers are still a little down. That's probably why he's available in 22% of leagues. But I think he can actually really help you in banger leagues. He's back to his old self and should stay that way for the balance of the season.
All right, I like that one. And the deep league pickup of the week is Morgan Frost.
Morgan Frost, available in 88% of leagues. The Philadelphia Flyers have a pretty busy schedule this week, which is something that you want. And he's a late bloomer. You do know Morgan Frost, he does have that first-round pedigree. He's playing on a line now with all former first-rounders. Joel Farabee on the left, Owen Tippett on the right. That line's been quite productive. You have Morgan Frost, who has 6 goals, 12 points in his last 10 games. He's averaging, I think, north of 17 minutes during those past 10 games as well. Centering the top line, also the second power play unit. And he isn't a zero in the shots category. I sort of think of him as more of a playmaker, but you're getting some decent goal output of late as well. And he can still put the puck on net more than you'd think from a typical playmaker. So pretty valuable right now, especially in a deep format.
Okay, I like that one. And the WTF pick of the week, another player I absolutely love. That is Matt Boldy.
Yeah, Matt Boldy. I don't know what people are doing. He's available in 17% of leagues. He's scoring as well as any player in the league right now. Going into Monday's games, he had a ridiculous 10 goals in a 7-game stretch, just pretty much taking the mantle, carrying the team in the offensive department since Kirill Kaprizov went out. And I've always been a big proponent of Boldy, even when he was slumping earlier this year. All his shot metrics were suggesting he wasn't really slumping. He just had bad luck. He's a really talented goal scorer, so I'm not surprised to see him go bananas. Obviously, it's not going to last at this level, but still, he's a very impactful goal scorer. I think we're looking at probably a 40-goal guy next year, and he's pretty much playing like a 40-goal guy right now, and that's someone that should be in every single lineup owned in 100% of leagues.
All right, and our tip of the week is to consider team stakes in the real-life standings, which seems like a pretty straightforward concept.
Yes, so that's tying back to what I said about Mitch Marner. You're at the point of the season where every single game matters. You have to pay a lot of attention. So if you're breaking a tie between should I pick up this player or this player, should I drop this player or this player, you really have to look at those real-life standings and decide, does this team have anything to play for? So the Marner example, it makes sense. The Leafs, they're locked into their matchup with Tampa Bay. The odds of being caught for home ice are very low. They're playing Tampa Bay one more time, so they can sort of save all their eggs for that basket if they need to. They're doing a lot of load management. So you have to look for a team that has some motivation. So it could be, if you use the Flyers as an example, young guys who have a big opportunity to prove themselves down the stretch. Or it could be, to use the Mackenzie Weegar example, a team that's fighting for a playoff spot. What you don't want is a team that has everything locked up and has every reason to rest, load manage their stars. So be very careful. Pay a lot of attention to their real life standings.
Cool. And it's like, see, at this point, you're just kind of looking at the teams that like have to desperately get in, and like those are the teams you got to be targeting at this point, right?
Exactly.
So yeah.
So we're gonna get some
like Tampa, the teams like Tampa, the teams like Toronto, like you're mentioning, like the teams that have kind of just been floating around. They're trying things out. They're not going out there to go out there and score 1,000 goals a game anymore.
That's right. Well, it's funny because I was interviewing Victor Hedman last week or the week before, and I said to him, "Hey, come on. You're watching game film of the Leafs now, right? Like, why wouldn't you be watching game film?" And he was like, "Well, no, we're going to play them again, and I can watch the highlight reels. I know what Matthews and Marner can do." That's what he said. But I'm like, "Come on, you're locked in. You may as well just start getting ready for that matchup." And to get you ready for your remaining playoff matchups, we're going to bring in a heavy hitter with some extra fantasy advice. It's Brock Seguin, part of the Daily Faceoff family, coming up next. Well, everybody, we figured we're near the end of the fantasy hockey season, the regular season, the real fantasy seasons. We figured it would only be fitting to bring in our partner in crime, Daily Faceoff managing fantasy editor, Brock Seguin. Brock, welcome back to the show. How you doing, my friend?
Thanks for having me again, guys, and I'm doing well. As somebody who writes about this stuff every single day for the entirety of the season, it is nice to finally reach the end and get a little bit of a break. So I'm looking forward to the end of the season, and obviously NHL playoffs, there's nothing more exciting. So looking forward to that as well.
Absolutely. Me too. And we're just going to launch into some questions. We'll start with, for anyone out there who's still in your fantasy league right now, I know some leagues are done, but there are others that are still playing out the string. They might be fantasy championships or roto leagues that go to the last day of the regular season. So if you are looking for that league winning pickup, I'm going to say under 10% owned in Yahoo formats, who are you looking at as someone that can put a team over the top right now in fantasy?
Well, first of all, I think it all depends if your finals are 1 week or 2 weeks long. If it's just for the rest of this week, I think probably somebody from the Philadelphia Flyers is your best bet. They've got 4 games left this week. It's unfortunate the way the NHL schedule is kind of working these next 2 weeks. It really kind of doesn't lend itself very well to fantasy hockey. Almost all the games are on, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. There's no real way to stream right now. So the Flyers, they're the only team left with 4 games, and they actually have players that are available under 10% owned that look decent. The only other team with 4 games is the Avs, and they don't really have anybody that fits that. So from the Flyers, you're probably looking at somebody like Joel Farabee. He's 6% owned. He's got 9 points in his last 9 games, 4 goals, 5 assists. He usually leaves you wanting a little bit more in the shot department, but he's playing around 18, 19 minutes a night, which is always good. And, you know, he's got 22 games this season with at least 3 shots on goal, so he is capable. And then on top of that, he's playing with Frost and Owen Tippett. That's a line that's been very productive. They've actually averaged 4.1 goals for per 60 this season, which is an elite rate. They don't have a ton of minutes. I think it's about 130 minutes together. But if your league isn't quite as deep and you don't need to go down to Joel Farabee, Owen Tippett, I think, is probably the pickup of the week at 29% owned. He's been great, 12 points, 4.1 shots per game, playing close to 21 minutes per night in his last 18 games. So Farabee would be the guy I would go with, but if you aren't quite in a little bit of a shallower league, I think it would be Tippett. On the other hand, if you're in a league with 2-week-long finals, I think somebody from the Sabres are probably the target. From a skater perspective, they have the most games at 7. They have the 4th easiest schedule over the next 2 weeks as well. So the name that sticks out under 10% owned is Jack Quinn at 10. I think he's 6 or 7% rostered. That second line has been really, really solid for them as of late. Quinn's been really productive, 7 points in his last 10 games. And if you look back even further, 16 points in his last 23 games. That's a 57-point pace over 82 games for a guy playing under 50 minutes a night. So the production for the amount of usage he's getting has been pretty awesome. But Devin Levi, I think you have to look at as well. He's one of the rare, like, under 10% owned goalies that could really be a difference maker for you down the stretch. I think it's fair to argue that he might be the Sabres' best option at this point. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen struggled. Craig Anderson's banged up. And if you look at the schedule, he could start 5 of their next 7 games down the stretch and be a difference maker for you in the finals. So if you need some help in goal, which I'm assuming you probably don't if you've made it this far, but if you need that extra push, Devin Levi, he's still out there at 6%. And I think he'd be a guy that could be a big impact player.
I picked up Levi as soon as I was able to when he signed his contract. So looking ahead to next season, is there a player that was kind of a bust this year that might be able to break out next year?
Yeah, I guess it's more just a bounce back candidate. I think Alex DeBrincat's a guy that fits that mold. He was drafted on average early 4th round this year, but so far he's returned 9th round value. So really not what you were expecting from DeBrincat. His shooting percentage has dipped from 14.5% over his career to 10.4% this season. We saw something similar to this out of him in 2020, and he responded with 73 goals over his next 134 games. That's a 45-goal pace. So his on-ice shooting percentage has also dipped. I imagine it's under 10% for the second time in his career. I imagine his assist numbers will probably be better. I guess it really depends on if he ends up re-signing with the Senators. He's obviously an RFA at the end of the year, but if he does re-sign with the Senators, which I imagine he will, this is a team that really kind of dominated puck possession. Expected goals metrics were through the roof first half of the season, but they couldn't score. They've been much better in the second half, and I think that this is a super talented team that's going to take an even further step next year. Obviously, Josh Norris being back in the fold will help a guy like DeBrincat. Playing with Norris or Tim Stützle full-time will be helpful. So I think he'll be a nice bounce-back candidate next year, and I think a lot of owners that got burned by him this year probably won't be looking in his direction, so he should also come at a pretty good discount on draft day as well.
All right. And Brock, a couple weeks ago on Daily Faceoff, we had a piece just looking at Connor Bedard and soliciting opinions from various people in the fantasy sector of how early they'd be willing to take him in a redraft league next year before we know his team. And we had a range of picks. I think some people, the lowest was Shayna Goldman. It was 65th to 75th. I was 19th. I think, Steven, you were around that range. And Brock, you had the highest slot projected for Connor Bedard. I think it was 14th. So could you elaborate on that and why you're that confident in Bedard making a huge impact right away?
Yeah, obviously, I think it's a very loose ranking at this moment. Without knowing exactly where he's going, it's pretty much impossible to say, depending where he lands. Like, he could go somewhere like Detroit and really maybe not play as many minutes as he could somewhere else if he ends up on the second line behind Larkin or something like that. So it really depends. But based on his absurd numbers in Regina, he projects for about 90 points next season on my rookie model. Connor McDavid really seems like the only comparable at this point, since they put up nearly identical totals in juniors during their draft year. And in McDavid's rookie year, I had McDavid ranked 10th. He probably was going to live up to that ranking. He was on pace for 88 points before, obviously, the season-ending injury. And teams were scoring, on average, half a goal less per game over that time. So if McDavid was going to be at 88 points, I don't think it's crazy to argue that Bedard could get up to 90. And then if you look at the projections from this season, Bedard would end up around the 14th best skater. Obviously, you could argue a couple goalies could go before him, but without doing all the work of doing all my projections for next season, I think I could loosely rank him close to that spot. You're going to have guys like Jonathan Huberdeau who are going to crater and other guys that will rise. So in and around that spot, I think feels good. But again, where he lands is going to ultimately decide his value. If he ends up in Chicago with very limited quality around him, I think he's going to struggle a little bit more. But if he ends up in somewhere like Anaheim, where he could find himself on a line with Troy Terry, maybe Mason McTavish, they move him back to the wing, Columbus with Gaudreau and Patrick Laine perhaps, then those are spots where he could really thrive in year one. So right now, I'll loosely rank him around the early second round because the upside, I think, is tremendous. I don't want him going to anywhere else if he's going to have a huge year. I want him on my team.
Cool. I like that one. So with playoff pools either underway or starting soon, what's your preferred scoring format for that?
So I've been in a playoff pool longer than I've been in a season-long pool. I think it's almost 20 years. My dad got me into it with some of his buddies and uncles when I was like 14 years old. So I've been doing it for a long time, and it's very simple. We do a 12-team snake draft, 10 skaters, 1 team goalie. You get 1 point for a goal, 1 point for an assist, and 1 point for a team win. It's very simple, but I like it that way because the playoffs are so interesting in itself. You don't need fantasy to make it that much more interesting. And I don't want to be sitting there trying to enjoy a playoff game, hoping I've got a guy blocking a bunch of shots or how many shots on goal he's taken. I think it's simple. Just keeping it simple is the way to go. Because the fantasy or the regular playoffs are much more exciting than the regular season as it is. So fantasy doesn't need to up the game for us. So very simple. I like the idea of a snake draft though too, because it really changes how you approach it, right? Like if you're doing some, a lot of pools are tiered rankings. You pick a guy from this tier, pick a guy from this tier. Where a snake draft, you might go in thinking that the Maple Leafs are going to get knocked out in the first round. But if everybody else is loading up on Tampa and Boston, suddenly you find yourself on the Maple Leafs and you become a Maple Leafs fan for the playoffs. So I like a snake draft format still in the playoffs, and it makes for a little bit extra fun.
I like the simplicity as well. I totally agree. Just you want it to be sort of more for the love of the game, and it's a nostalgic feel when you're doing this sort of old school, the type of pool you could almost keep track of it on a piece of paper because it's that simple. I think it's the way to go for playoffs as well. I was curious, Brock, just for your go-to strategy for these types of pools. And last year, I'm going to do it again this year. I'm going to release a ranking set that's sort of tiered based on how far I think players are going to go. And is that what you do? Are you one of those guys that likes to pick one team and load up on that team because you think that team's going to have a deep run? Or do you prefer to sort of hedge your bets with guys from lots of different teams?
Well, with the current playoff format, I think the way you got to try to do it is build your team optimally, right? You don't want teams matching up in the second round. You want to try to at least spread yourself out and have everybody get to the conference finals. Build it optimally so that you're not getting your guys knocking each other out in the second round. So you've got the 4 quadrants. Try to target one team from each quadrant is really the way to maximize the games played that you could have and not risking having Maple Leafs and Bruins and then having them meet in the second round and knocking each other out. Sure, they could be fine, but if you build it out optimally and you get lucky enough that your 4 teams all advance to the conference finals, that's the way to do it. I released playoff rankings as well last year, and we'll be doing the same this year. And it's nice the way that you and I do it because they are a little bit different. But the way I use it, there's lots of really good public models out there that try to predict just how, the percentage chance of each team advancing past the first round, second round. And I use, combine all those public models to get kind of a consensus idea of just how far everybody expects those teams to go. And that gives me a rough estimate on games played for each team. And from there, I can build out my projection. So I think that's really the only way to do it because you don't know how far these teams are going. We're basically just guessing. But if I can use the power of mathematics and some of these great models out there to help me make some more accurate projections, I think I did pretty well last year. I had, the Avs towards the top of the end. I think I ended up having McKinnon, number 1, and obviously that worked out pretty well. So hopefully we're hoping for good things again this year.
For sure. And for anyone who's listening or watching, just a reminder, we will have those dual rankings coming out in a couple weeks. The playoffs are really just around the corner. It's going to be exciting stuff. Brock, always a pleasure to have you on. And before we let you go, one quick chance to plug anything you want, my friend.
At this point of the season, I don't have a whole lot left to plug, but obviously, the playoff rankings will be up pretty much the day after the season ends because we don't have much of a bubble in between the end of the regular season and the playoffs. So if you are playing in a playoff pool, obviously take a look at my rankings, take a look at Matt's rankings. We're going to be doing everything we can to help you reach the fantasy playoff glory. But yeah, I'm just looking forward to the playoffs. It's always such a fun time of year. As a Red Wings fan, I'm hoping I get to be a part of this again as a fan soon. But obviously, it's still fun to watch, regardless of if you have a team to root for at this time of year or not.
Awesome. Thanks, Brock.
Thanks as always, boys.
Great stuff from Brock, as always. And Steven, we're going to turn it over to you right now for the prospect update. And this is someone I've been watching all season long, putting up some really exciting numbers. Logan Stankoven of the Dallas Stars is looking like quite a steal. So tell me what you're seeing in him, why you're excited about him.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Logan Stankoven. He's someone where he got drafted 47th overall in 2021. And I think kind of just across the board, if you watched him play beforehand, you're like, no, he's way better than that. But the big thing about him is, ironically, his size, which is 5'8". So he's not a big player. And I think that's what scared a lot of scouts. And it's one thing to go out there and dominate junior. It's another thing to be undersized and try to thrive in the NHL. And we are continuously seeing some very high quality prospects that are smaller every year. But again, that's still the exception. It's not the rule when it comes to the size of players. And whether that's fair or not, that's up to you. But when it comes to Stankoven, he's a guy that I think will have no problem thriving when he hits the Dallas Stars. And, this year can almost be considered a bit of a disappointment because he didn't go out there and beat his point total from last year. He had 104 points last year. He had 97 this year. He did play fewer games. He played actually 11 fewer games. So that is understandable, but I think a lot of people kind of expected an even bigger offensive jump. But regardless, no reason to be concerned about him with the way he dominated Kamloops. He had a good World Junior tournament. It felt quieter compared to the summer tournament a year ago, but he actually had more points this year. It was just, I think the difference was Connor Bedard looked like Connor Bedard, but the way he drives plays, the way he brings the speed to this game, it's just like, man, he's going to be such a huge piece for the Dallas Stars, a team that continues to make some very good draft picks in the last couple of years. So I do think he's someone that once he cracks the NHL, he's going to be a top 6 forward. He's an incredible faceoff man. Last 2 years led the World Juniors in faceoff percentage, but he also can play on the wing. So if Dallas feels like that's the better way to get him started to see if some of those guys he can play with, that's a very good opportunity there. But I think that Logan Stankoven's a guy that's going to be getting 60 points quite quickly in the NHL. And I don't know, maybe he's an 80-point guy down the line. So, you don't go out there and get over 100 points as a draft +1 player unless you're really good, because, it's one thing to go out there and be a point per game player as a draft prospect. And he didn't get to really do that because of the COVID year, but the way he answered, and it was almost 2 points per game, that's just unbelievable. So this is a guy that's going to have no problem scoring in the NHL. He's a strong player for his size. I don't think he's going to be someone who's going to be physically intimidated all the time. So Dallas, got a great one there.
Yeah, and it's pretty intriguing to think of where the Dallas Stars were just in the bubble tournament in 2020. There was a perception that it was the last ride for this old team, and they've reloaded so well because of their drafting. Got to give props to their director of amateur scouting, Joe McDonnell, because they just keep hitting home runs, whether it's Jake Ottinger, Rupe Hintz, Jason Robertson. It's not like they're picking these guys top 5. They're finding these guys as gems, and they just keep. I can't talk today, can I? They keep finding these steals. And the exciting thing about Stankoven is that it would give Dallas the ability eventually to drop Tyler Seguin down to a long-term third-line role. You can not have to rely on your older guys as much. And, of course, you also have Wyatt Johnson, who's made the team this year too. So they just can't miss right now. Very exciting stuff. So, Steven, we're going to move on to our ProLine Plus Best Bet of the Week segment. And I feel pretty confident about this one. The truth is, I've had a great year. I'm just going to pat myself on the back and just say, hey, I've been pretty much on fire the whole season. I haven't hit every week, but I feel like I've hit on 3/4 of my bets. So I'm going to try and keep that momentum going. And I'm looking at the under for Tuesday night's game, Ottawa Senators, Carolina Hurricanes. So the Hurricanes lost Andrei Svechnikov, I believe it was March 11th. Since that injury, they are 28th in the NHL in goals per 60 minutes, while they're still 9th best in terms of preventing goals per 60 minutes. So they are a low event hockey team right now in terms of just pucks going into the net. And that's what you care about when you're betting on the over-under. It's 6.5. The under is at +183. I really like that bet against the Ottawa Senators at home in Carolina. And it's, I think, 4 straight games now for Carolina where they've been 5 or fewer on the total, and that's happened 6 of their last 8 games. So they just don't have the punch without Svechnikov and Pacioretty, and then couple that with the fact that they're still a great defensive team. I'm just looking at another low-scoring game, even against a team that has good offense like Ottawa. So under 6.5, plus 183. What do you think of that one?
I like it. This is a team where if the goaltending is right, they can really shut things down. They got some good goaltending on both sides. So I'm going to go. I'm not going to go against you at this point because you've kind of been right on pretty much all of these. So again, I'm sticking with you.
Alrighty. Well, a word from our sponsor, Proline Plus. Proline Plus is not just another sportsbook, being the only sportsbook that gives 100% of its profits back to Ontario. Proline has been your local trusted sportsbook for over 30 years, now offering Ontario sports fans more ways to play in-store, online, or take the game on the go with the Proline app, with your favorite sports and events right at your fingertips. Download the Proline app and bet in-app with Proline Plus today, or head over to prolineplus.ca to learn more. All right, Stephen, I think it's time to take a couple questions. What do we have?
All right, this question comes from Sens Mike 1. I just want to give a shout out to our YouTube commenters. There's a lot of you guys. You guys rock. But Sens Mike 1. Jake Sanderson appears to be the future in Ottawa, but what are we expecting from him from a fantasy ceiling perspective? Is he a 40 to 50 point guy? What would make him the most valuable?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I believe that a ceiling for Jake Sanderson, and keeping in mind that offense is up, I think it's going to be 50 or 60 points. 50 or 60 points in the year 2004 would have made you the best offensive defenseman in the game. But 50 or 60 points right now might make you, top 15 or 20 as an offensive defenseman. To me, it's because Jake Sanderson is so well-rounded. I wouldn't say his natural gifts are absolutely elite offensively, but he's just so good at everything. And he's certainly not a slouch offensively. He can move the puck. He's going to hit 30 points as a rookie. So I do think eventually he's going to be locked in long-term to a top pair role. He's going to play a ton of minutes. And because of all that ice time, it's going to help his volume. He's already, even as a rookie, a huge asset in blocking shots. So to me, just because he's going to be a do-everything defenseman who has a lot of responsibility defensively as well, I'm going to see his peak as something like 10 goals, 55 points, 175 blocks. And that profile reminds me a little bit of Alex Pietrangelo. So someone who is a good puck mover, can put the puck in the net, but also can function as a shutdown guy, play a ton of minutes, also blocks a ton of shots. So that's what I'm looking at as your long-term comparable, Alex Pietrangelo.
Okay, I like that one. The next question comes from Hard Boiled Eggs, and it's Boyle, like as in like Brian Boyle, Dan Boyle. That was good. Yeah. Who would you expect to get the bulk of Vegas' starts down the stretch?
This is a really tough one because I just get a headache even thinking about it. It's an absolute mess. There's goalies getting hurt every 2 seconds in Vegas. You can never keep track of who's in, who's out. And right now, we know Logan Thompson and Aiden Hill are the ones that are sidelined. So it's Laurent Brossoit and Jonathan Quick. A couple weeks ago, it was Jonathan Quick comeback tour, and he was taking over the crease. Now he's back to being terrible. Jonathan Quick, .853 save percentage. I think it was in his last 4 games going into Monday night. So to me, I think the pumpkin is here now. There was the nice little Cinderella moment for Jonathan Quick, but I think he's turned back to the weak version of Jonathan Quick we've seen as his career declines. So if you look at Vegas' schedule, they do have one more set of back-to-backs. So I think you're going to see at least one more game of each between Brossoit and Quick. But other than that, I think Brossoit has been the much more solid bet at the moment, just in the last couple of weeks. And based on the injuries to Thompson and Hill, I'm going to have to push my chips in on Brossoit in the short term. Obviously, that could change based on the health status of everyone else in that goaltending battery. But right now, I think that's what you have to back, Laurent Brossoit.
All right. I like that. And that's it for the questions. So I guess it's time for the starting lineup, which you're doing today. And I'm a big music fan. I love going to concerts. I haven't been to a ton recently. I don't know if you've seen concert prices in the last, basically since the pandemic began, but name your top 6 concerts that you've attended.
Okay, so I'll start with a disclaimer that one of my general hot takes in life is that I think concerts are overrated. Because when you think about it, you're going to a crowded setting to watch a band or an artist that you really like. You cannot hear them in the same way. They're often very far away. They don't sound as good as what you're used to hearing. And it just doesn't equate to what you're getting when you're listening to them at home. Unless you're in a really intimate setting. I think that's different. But overall, I'm just not a huge concert person. I don't go to a ton for that reason. That said, I have been to some good ones. And it's sort of been all over in terms of the type of music, but sort of skews more rock and roll. Not necessarily that these are my top choices, but these are the concerts that turned out to be the best. So number 6, I have Oasis. At the time, a then unknown band called the Arctic Monkeys opened for them and kind of stole the show. And you had Oasis putting on a show, but then Noel Gallagher, or sorry, no, it was Liam Gallagher, being true to his character. Whenever there was a song that was more Noel heavy, Liam would just stand at the edge of the stage and fold his arms and stare at the audience, which is pretty funny. Number 5, Tragically Hip. They can be a polarizing band in Canada. Some people think they're overrated. Some people swear by them. I'm sort of in between, but in terms of their ability to put on a show, I don't think anyone really questions that. And I did get to see them when Gord Downie was still in his prime, and they were pretty fantastic at the Molson Amphitheater, as it was called at the time. Number 4, I had a big punk rock phase when I was a teenager, and I saw a great tandem show between No Use for a Name and Pulley. Fun fact about Pulley, who stole the show that night, their lead singer, Scott Radinsky, was a Major League Baseball relief pitcher. Number 3, a strange Bon Jovi show that I saw, in which they put on a great show, but it was Richie Sambora who stole the show, in my opinion, from Bon Jovi, and he sang the lead vocals on a lot of the tougher songs, which threw me for a loop. So that's number 3, Bon Jovi. Number 2, U2. I saw them fairly recently. I tried to go the night before, and then they were like, "Sir, your tickets are for tomorrow." And then so my sister and I went home. We went again the next day. And I think they put on one of the best shows I've ever seen in terms of the ability to duplicate the sound you hear on the radio if you're listening to them on your, you're streaming them, whatever it is. I've never seen a band that was able to actually replicate its own quality of sound as well as U2 did for that concert. And number 1, I'm going to blatantly cheat and say Michael Bublé, just in the sense that, because obviously, as you know, if you listen to the show, he's in my league. He's become friends with all of his league mates over the years. So we do get a very special experience going to his shows and getting to learn a lot more about what goes on behind the scenes of a concert. It really does make the show extra enjoyable and far more interesting. So I have to pick that as number 1, just because there's no experience I've ever had that can equate to that. Even though I know that's kind of cheating, but that's the top 6.
I like it. I like, other than the Tragically Hip pick, I like that. I've seen none of those bands live, but the one band I always recommend to everybody to see, if you get a chance, because it doesn't happen often, is the band Dragon Force. Now, if you've played Guitar Hero 3, you know their song Through the Fire and the Flames. But I'm a big fan of them. They do a really good power metal show, and it's just like some of the best guitar work you'll see live. And it's super fun. They embraced that they use a lot of like video game sounds in their music. So they actually, like, on stage, they have multiple arcade cabinets and they stand on them, but they actually show videos and stuff, and they're interactive. It's really cool. And I have slightly bad memories, though, the last time I went, where I had just fractured my foot at the OHL Cup last year. And then naturally, the thing you do after fracturing your foot is stand on it for 8 hours and then go see a concert where there's a wall of death. And that has caused issues with my foot ever since. But anyways, that's a band I recommend everyone watch.
Yeah, that sounds fun. That sounds like a pretty exciting experience aside from the foot troubles. Well, Stephen, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you, of course. Thank you to Proline Plus, and thank you to Brock Seguin, and for everyone listening and watching. We are still hanging around, but our schedule is going to be slowing down soon. Next episode will be dropping sometime next week as we get close to the playoffs. It's going to be a fantasy playoff pool spectacular. That will be what to watch for next. And hopefully you've had a good regular season in fantasy, and hopefully you made a deep run in your playoffs, and we'll talk some playoff pools soon.